Hey there, my name is Shane Craddock, and this is the Inner Edge podcast, where I share a different take on how to lead and live a sustainable, high-performance life. Over the course of different episodes, I'm going to challenge the belief that tension, stress, and struggle are essential to success and creativity. My experience is that there's an easier way, there's a better way, and indeed there's an essential way that we need to explore for the times that we live in. So let's go ahead, let's jump in and explore. So this week, I am going to talk a little bit about a very common universal thing, which has a major impact on your work, your life, your experience of life. And it is the assumptions that run your life, or should I say quietly run your life. And I guess we all have them. There's biases in different ways, most of them unconscious. But in my experience, most of the stress in your life isn't usually coming from what's actually happening. It's actually coming from what you're assuming is often happening. And I think that we can treat assumptions that we make as facts because we have that capacity in our minds, just whatever we think is true. Because we get busy with life, we can often ignore questioning the story that we're telling ourselves once it feels emotionally convincing about people or circumstances. And I think pressure, anxiety, and overthinking are often signals of untested certainty, untested assumptions. So this particular exploration in this podcast, it isn't about positive thinking. You could say it's more about clean thinking. I was actually doing a long-form audio in my Inner Advantage audio club, which you should check out in the show notes if you like these audios. These are longer-form audios. They're kind of an album of 12 long-form audios that, from my point of view, are high value. But I was doing an episode about clean thinking versus dirty thinking, and it's inspired me to do this shorter episode about assumptions because a lot of our assumptions to me will be more in the dirty thinking, and not the dirty thinking that you're thinking of. It's more thinking that actually compromises your view, like having a window with dirt on it, and you're looking through that window, but you forget there's dirt on the window compromising your view. We clean the window, we get a better, clearer perspective on what reality is. That's clean thinking. Now, what is an assumption? Okay, well, to me, an assumption is a belief that I've stopped questioning, that I've just decided that that's true based on my experience, my perception, my opinion. But ultimately, you break it down, a belief is made up of thinking, of thoughts. Now, an assumption could be something like, this has to work or I'm in trouble. If I slow down, everything's going to fall apart. They're unhappy with me. They don't like me. I can't manage all of these things. But if you break it down, none of those things are facts. They might seem like they are, but once you say them or you believe what you're saying or thinking, your nervous system reacts as if they're true. I sometimes do an experiment in workshops where I get people to just imagine a stressful situation. They were previously calm. We get them to imagine a stressful situation, and now they feel stressed. And it's the same thing, is that as soon as you start to play an assumption as if it's true, your nervous system reacts. I think the brain definitely confuses intensity of emotion with accuracy of reality. So if you're feeling something with strong emotion, your brain seems to take that as this must be real. But that doesn't mean it's real. It just means that your nervous system is reacting to what you're playing in your mind. And I think the challenge for us, including myself now as I'm saying this, is if you don't test assumptions regularly in business and in your personal life, they will just run behavior quietly on autopilot in your business and in your life. And they'll shape decisions, they'll shape energy, they'll shape your confidence, they'll shape kind of how you show up in meetings and conversations. And what I'm fascinated by is that they're often never named. And in that way that I'm talking about, assumptions can create a lot of pressure. They can cloud proper, effective, realistic decisions. And reality creates data, but assumptions create pressure as far as I can see. And everybody seems to do it. I mean, you get a message on email or on WhatsApp, and maybe it's short or vague, your mind automatically fills in the blanks. That might be dependent on your mood, how secure, insecure you feel. You can get reactive to messages. Like email is a fascinating one because it seems to have a negative bias from what the research says about it. So very often people just assume in a negative tone if you leave something vague or open. You might feel behind, or you might assume that you're failing, or maybe you feel tired and you assume something is wrong. Doesn't necessarily mean you have the evidence. You just tell yourself a story based on an assumption that feels convincing. And then once that assumption is in place, you start acting as if it's true. You know, I've spoken with business owners, CEOs who just feel that their team is useless, but that's very often based on a mood or a recent setback or adversity. And very quickly, once you kind of get into the assumptions, you realize that no, hold on, it's not the entirety. There might be one, maybe two people who are causing an issue that we need to address. But very often the assumption will cause huge stress for the CEO or the owner. So in the same way, you might make an assumption that we're not going to succeed, or the market is failing, or the market is down. And again, it's down to, well, what's the actual data saying? What is reality as opposed to what's the assumption? A person, I've had these conversations many times. They could come to me at any level of a business or life and say, look, I'm overwhelmed. I don't think I can make this work. And the key element there, I think, is to slow things down in their mind and just then examine that sentence and let's look for reality versus the assumptions about reality. And sometimes that reality might be actually, look, yeah, you're going to start make some changes here because that's not going to work, or you're causing a problem in other areas. Or other times, often it's, no, you can't make it work if you do this, and this. And simple ways to test it could be just by asking questions to an open, slower mind. For example, what exactly does this mean? Like, what is the assumption that actually, what do you see here? What part of it feels unmanageable if you feel, for example, I can't make this work? And what evidence do you actually have? What is reality? What is reality? It's very hard sometimes to get in touch with what reality is. It's hugely valuable to have those, at times, difficult discussions. Say, well, hang on, what is reality? Because within minutes then of getting to reality, the assumptions will crack. Not because it's wrong, but because it was never properly examined. And then once it's genuinely exposed, proper choices emerge. I think if you think of assumptions a bit like background apps running on your phone, you're not aware of them, but they drain the battery. I was looking at it recently. My son Sam he just kind of showed me, I often forget to do this. He says, look, how many apps do you have open down? And he just showed me all the screens. And I thought, oh my God, no wonder the battery's going down quickly. It just slows everything down. And I think your mind is like that, your inner world, that so many assumptions open, they just slow you down without even realizing it. And testing an assumption is like closing an app or several apps. Nothing necessarily dramatic happens, but suddenly you might find you have more energy, more clarity, more focus. So let's turn it on to you in terms of consider maybe an area of your work or life, to start with, maybe that you're frustrated with or you're not happy with, and ask yourself a couple of questions. First of all, what are you assuming right now about that? And be open enough to kind of reflect on, okay, what are the assumptions that I'm making, good and bad? What feels true about that situation or person, but I haven't actually checked it? Can't tell you how many times in my life, or I've seen with other people's lives, where they've made assumptions about other people, but they never really interrogated or checked it. And then they behaved then in a way that probably wasn't appropriate. And if you can drag out those assumptions, and they're always there, and flipped it on its head and said, well, if this assumption that I'm making turned out not to be true, how would I show up differently? What would I do differently? So if that assumption wasn't true, how would I show up differently? So I think in that way, it isn't about optimism. It's about accuracy. It's about realism. And if there's one takeaway maybe from today, apart from encouraging you to take out a pen and a page this week and identify areas where maybe, you're frustrated, as I said, or disappointed, or that you feel it's not working right, and just list out your assumptions and then test them with those questions as a starting point. Because what I've seen, I suppose, in my own life, my personal life, my business life, and then with clients is that most pressure and fog disappears when assumptions are tested, not solved, not trying to be proved, but are tested. You don't need better answers. That's not what we need. What we need is an open mind willing to ask and answer better questions. And I think the moment that we test an assumption, we move from reaction back into empowered choice. And that's where real clarity lives. That's it for this week. Ciao for now.